So in today's lesson, we're going to talk about applied proportion problems. In a previous video, we had talked about how to solve a pure proportion problem, right? And I had said that, well, if you want to solve a pure proportion problem, what we have to do is that we have to basically cross multiply, right? So if we have something like 1/2 over x over 6, then we will cross multiply, and this becomes 2x, because 2 times x is x and 1 times 6 is 6, right? So this becomes 2x equals 6 and divided by 2, and then x is equal to 3, right? In this example, right? I had mentioned that an applied proportion problem, that a pure proportion problem can be, it can be simple like this, or it could be a little bit more complex, and that basically that if we're going to, that is better basically to cross multiply, because we can solve any proportion problem using that type of method, right? Okay, in today's lesson, we're going to talk about how to do applied proportion problems. Now, when we talk about applied mathematics, or when we talk about applied, doing something, applying the concept, right? What we mean is that we're trying to, we're trying to apply what we learned into a real world like situation, or to apply what we have learned into like something that is done in reality. Now, I deal with reality and I deal with the real world, right? So when we are doing the math in the real world, we have to say, okay, well, let's deal with realistic problems that are actually in existence, right? Okay. So for example, one real world problem that comes from my own personal experience, right, comes from going to, from traveling, right, is dealing with money, right, dealing with currency, right? Now, one example of an applied proportion problem is when you're dealing with the exchange rate between the money of different currencies, right? So, for example, I've been to China. I have traveled a lot. I've traveled to different places, and when you go to different countries, there's something called the exchange rate, right? And the exchange rate basically means when you go to a booth, and when you go to a booth, you have to you give the booth, the person in the booth, a certain amount of money, and when you give them a certain amount of money, you they give you back an equivalent in the local currency of the place that you go to, right? So basically, what exchange rate means in finance means when you are converting between different units of currency, right? When you convert between different units of currency. Right? So, one example of this, for example, is when you go to, for example, like if you go to China and you go to, if you're trying to exchange money between United States and China, right? So if you do that, right? So based on the current exchange rate, or at least the last time that I was there, right? One US dollar is equivalent to 7 RMB, about 1 US dollar is equivalent to about 7 RMB, right? So let's say, right, that we're, let's say, for example, that, let's say we brought $2,000, right? Let's say we brought $2,000 to China, right? And then let's say we said, okay, well, I brought $2,000 to China, and I want to know how much do I get back in RMB, right? How much do I get back in RMB when I go to the exchange booth? So I know that if one US dollar is equivalent to 7 RMB, right? And we have 2,000 US dollars, but we're trying to find is how much in RMB do we get back, right? So we cross multiply, right? And we say, okay, well, 1 times x is x, and 2,000 times 7 is 14,000, right? So we know that if we bring 2,000 US dollar to China, we know that we should get back 14,000 RMB. We should get back 14,000 RMB when it's exchanged, right? Let's use another example using the same currency. Let's say, for example, we have using the same exchange rate. We know that one US dollar is equivalent to 7 RMB, but let's say we have 5,000, and we want to know how much. If I bring $5,000 to China, how much will I get back in RMB when I go to the exchange booth, right? So I know that 1 times 7 is 7 and 5,000, right? 1 times 7 is 7 is 5,000. So I know that is 1. So 1, we know 1 times 5,000 is 7, right? So we cross multiply. And we know that 7 times 5 is 35,000 RMB. So we know that we should get back about 35,000 RMB, right? We have to make sure that when we're doing the conversion that we are using the correct unit, because you don't want to get that confused. We want to make sure that we use the correct unit when we are doing the conversion, because we don't, because we're dealing with money, right? So that's why it's important for us to use the USD and RMB, or to write down what the exchange rate or what the measurement is, so that we know what we are actually comparing or what we're trying to find, right? Okay. So we use 2 examples, right, to explain this, right? But now let's say, for example, right, another realistic situation. Let's say that we are already in China, right? We're already in China and we're trying to convert back to US dollar. And we're trying to say, okay, well, because let's say, for example, we're there, we're making money, we're doing our thing or whatever, right? And we say, all right, I have, using the same exchange rate, right? And let's say I said something like, well, I know that 1 US dollar is equivalent to 7 RMB, right? But let's say I make 28,000 RMB, right? I'm making 28,000 RMB per month, right? And I want to know, how much am I getting back in US dollar when I convert it back into US dollar? So in this case, the X is different. It's not in the same location, because we are talking about something, we're trying to find something different, right? So we say, okay, well, we do the same thing. We say, okay, well, I have 7 times X, which is 7X, and I have 1 times 28,000, which is 28,000, right? And we have to divide by 7, right? And when we divide by 7, we know that, well, 28,000 divided by 7 is 4,000. But in this case, we know that it's 4,000 US dollar, because we are trying to find how much it is in US dollar. We're trying to find out how much it is in US dollar. So we're trying to figure out how much it is in US dollars. So we know that when we answer the question, we know that, well, if I make 28,000 RMB in China, I know that I'm going to get back about 4,000 US dollar, right, when I convert it, right? So that's one example. That's one example of an applied proportion problem applied to finance, right? Now, let's say, for example, let's use another example. Let's say, for example, we have, let's say we go to Taiwan. Let's say we go to Taiwan, right? Okay, 1 US dollar is about 30 Taiwanese dollar, right? So we know that 1 US dollar is about 30 Taiwanese dollar, right? Based on experience, right? So we know that, okay, if I bring 1 US dollar and I go to 30, and I know it's 30, then I know, okay, well, if I bring 2,000 US dollar, how much would I get back in Taiwanese dollar? How would I get back in Taiwanese dollar? So we do the same thing. We cross multiply. And we know that 1 times x is x, and 2,000 times 30 is 60,000. So we should get back about 2,000, 60,000 Taiwanese dollar, right? Okay. I used these examples because these examples are a real world situation where you actually have to use like your knowledge of proportion. There are many, many, many examples of many ways in which proportions can be applied, but I guess the most immediate way in which one would kind of like understand proportion if we say it in the context of money. So because it's something that we use every day. So basically, essentially, like I said, when we are dealing with that and we are dealing with money, or we're dealing with exchange rates, or we're dealing with proportion, you just got to understand that when we're dealing with proportion, or when we're dealing with an applied proportion, that we want to make sure that we put the things in the correct place so that we know what we're trying to find. Okay. That's it for today. If you have any questions, you can comment. You can comment below, and if you need any more like additional help, like in terms of like a way in which proportions can be used in a more applied sense, you can contact me through YouTube, and I will try my best to try to help you. Okay, thank you, and have a nice day. Bye bye.